Good evening. The World Health Organization says Europe is now the epicenter of the global coronavirus pandemic. The news emerged as organised sport, both professional and amateur, across much of the UK, came to a standstill because of the outbreak. The Premier League, English Football League and Scottish matches have all been halted until the 3rd of April. In rugby, all Six Nations matches have been cancelled this weekend, and next month's London Marathon has been postponed. In the UK, 798 people have now been infected, up by 208 since yesterday. But it's thought the actual number may be much higher. 11 people have now died here, and the government says it expects more deaths in the weeks and months to come. We'll have more on an extraordinary day for sport in a moment. But first, here's our medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh.
This is Italy, one of the most advanced healthcare systems in the world. In the northern city of Brescia, they're reduced to treating patients in warehouses and tents because of coronavirus. Italy has the worst outbreak by far in Europe, but other countries are catching up.
Europe has now become the epicenter of the pandemic, with more reported cases and deaths than the rest of the world combined, apart from China.
Denmark announced it is closing its borders to foreigners from tomorrow. Nearly a dozen European countries have now imposed border controls. In Spain, a state of emergency will come into effect tomorrow, which could see restrictions on movement. The Foreign Office has advised against all but essential travel to Madrid and some other regions. France announced it is limiting gatherings to no more than 100 people. The Eiffel Tower and other key monuments and museums will close. A shutdown of schools will last at least 2 weeks. All of Europe wants to avoid scenes like these in Italy, but the UK's approach is in stark contrast to measures taken elsewhere. So what is the science behind the government's delay strategy? Well, if no action was taken, there'd be a huge peak of cases crammed into a few weeks, well above the capacity of NHS intensive care units. The government's aim is to flatten that peak and have more of the cases towards the summer when the NHS is better able to cope. That strategy only works if we all follow the new advice. If you have a continuous cough or a fever, a temperature above 37.8 degrees, you stay at home for a week. It's reckoned if that happens, it'll cut the peak of cases by 20%.
I'm about to do an online shop so that my daughter can have some microwave meals in and get herself food, because I shouldn't be preparing food for other people.
Sophie Rivet began self-isolating today after waking up with a fever. She's a single mum with a 13-year-old daughter.
And every time I use a room, I'm wiping down the surfaces.
The government acknowledges that millions of us may get COVID-19 in the coming months because the virus can't be stopped.
Our aim is not to suppress it completely. Also, because most people, the vast majority of people, get a mild illness, to build up some degree of herd immunity as well, so that more people are immune to this disease and we reduce the transmission. At the same time, we protect those who are most vulnerable from it.
The government is adamant its strategy to fight coronavirus is the right one. Lives will depend on it. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, it's been an unprecedented day for sport, with the coronavirus outbreak leading to the suspension of the Premier League until April and the cancellation of Six Nations rugby matches this weekend. Next month's London Marathon has also been postponed. Here's our sports editor, Dan Rowan.
Whether it's football, rugby, golf or Formula One, world sport has come to a standstill. This morning, after an emergency meeting, the Premier League finally confirmed an unprecedented shutdown until at least early April. The decision followed the news that Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta had tested positive for coronavirus. Callum Hudson-Odoi then becoming the first player to confirm he had the disease.
Hi guys, as you may be aware, I had the virus for the last couple of days, which I've recovered from. I'm following the health guidelines and self-isolating myself from everybody for the week.
Liverpool have enjoyed a glittering season, but with the club on the brink of a cherished title, the fans have been left in limbo.
It's disappointing, but yeah, 30 years. We've waited 30 years for the title. We can wait another 3 or 4 months. But typical Liverpool, we can only do it the hard way. So hopefully we'll do it in the next few months.
It is quite tough, but it's only suspended. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not cancelled, so we'll still be there.
With a host of clubs with players now in isolation, the whole of the English professional game has been suspended. Those in the cash-strapped Football League facing an uncertain financial future.
We've got 6 home games left, and if we don't play them, we'll be looking at a £250,000 hole in our finances at least. It's very worrying for any industry, which football is, that relies on people paying to come and watch it for the majority of its income. And all the associated things. It's extremely worrying.
With British football entirely derailed, matches in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland were also suspended. Here at Anfield, they'll be desperate for the campaign to resume, but senior figures within the sport fear that may prove impossible and the season is abandoned. That would be cruel on clubs like this and hugely damaging to the game as a whole. But it's not just football. The pandemic sending world sport into meltdown. This afternoon, next month's London Marathon was postponed until October. The start of the Formula One season won't start until May, with 4 races now cancelled. In golf, the prestigious Masters tournament was postponed. And on a chaotic day, tomorrow's Six Nations rugby between Wales and Scotland was first declared on and then off.
For us to be the only sporting event going on when other people were mindful of the obviously seriousness of the situation. And I think we just took into account supporters, players, our staff. Was it really essential to maybe subject them to that risk?
And what of the biggest show of all? Today, the symbolic Greek leg of the Olympic torch relay cancelled amid mounting concern over Tokyo 2020. Despite controversy over the government's support of such events, the Cheltenham Festival did conclude today. 69,000 fans present as album photo retained the Gold Cup. This the last action major sport could see for quite some time. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
The government has announced that local and mayoral elections in England, due to be held in May, will be postponed for a year due to the outbreak. Our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, is at Westminster Forest. So, Vicky, the outbreak is having ramifications affecting the democratic process.
Yeah, it is extremely unusual to delay an election for a year, but Downing Street saying it was impractical. They fear that it would coincide with the peak of this outbreak. You couldn't have campaigners knocking on doors or local councils being diverted from that task of dealing with the coronavirus outbreak. But I think that all of the developments today tell us that for several months the way we live our lives is really going to change fundamentally. And of course, the Prime Minister has to lead the country through this crisis. Now, he says he is basing his decisions on the science, but a lot of this will come down to his personal judgment. That has already been questioned by some opposition parties today. I think that will continue and grow with the news now that the government is planning on banning mass gatherings. There is no doubt this is going to be an enormous test of Boris Johnson's leadership.
Vicky, thank you. Vicky Young there at Westminster. Tonight, Donald Trump declared a national emergency in the United States in response to the threat from the coronavirus. He also said his administration may ban travel from the UK to America due to the increase in cases here. Nick Bryant has more details from Washington.
Attention customers, for your safety and the safety.
Grand Central Station on the first full day of New York City's state of emergency. Morning commuters so far unaware that the entire country was about to be placed on a similar crisis footing. In the city of his birth, there's been fury at Donald Trump for not taking the pandemic seriously enough, for fumbling the federal government's response.
The federal government has botched this absolutely out of control. There's been little to no testing. They've been completely misinforming people. What you're hearing has changed from one day to the next.
He doesn't believe in science, for heaven's sakes.
Could I say that Trump's completely clueless? It's all about him.
In the fragrant setting of the Rose Garden, he addressed what for many Americans is the most frightening crisis of his presidency.
I am officially declaring a national emergency. Two very big words:
He was asked about his controversial European travel ban and why it didn't include the UK, a decision that's clearly now under review.
And we are looking at it based on the new numbers that are coming out, and we may have to include them in the list of countries that we will, you could say, ban or whatever it is during this period of time. But yeah, the numbers have gone up fairly precipitously over the last 24 hours, so we may be adding that.
His tone tonight was self-congratulatory, and there were still indications he doesn't quite get the magnitude.
Okay, I like that.
Of a crisis he's minimized for weeks.
Our numbers are lower than just about anybody. Everybody has to be calm. It's all going to work out.
I like this stuff. I really get it. People are surprised that I understand it. Every one of these doctors said, how do you know so much about this?
It'll go away. I think people are viewing us as having done a very good job.
But in the suburbs of America, a graphic reminder of where this superpower has fallen short in testing for the virus. Here in New Rochelle, a hotspot on the outskirts of New York, they've opened up drive-through test centres under the eye of the National Guard. And tonight the president was asked if he should be tested for the virus.
Are you going to be?
Most likely, yeah. Most
When do
likely.
you think
Not for
that'll
that
happen?
reason, but because I think I will do it anyway.
He's a president so often at the centre of chaos, at the head of a nation that's yearning for calm. Now, the national emergency allows Donald Trump to throw more money at this problem and to cut through some of the regulatory red tape. But the criticism has been that he views this pandemic through the prism of November's presidential election, that he's worried about the impact on the economy, that he's worried about the impact on the stock market, and that he's worried about the impact of his chances of spending 4 more years in the White House.